For most Canadians, the realities of war come exclusively through images captured by others and sent back from conflict zones. Joining us now to help us better understand what those images convey, Thierry Gervais. He is head of research at the Ryerson Image Center and curator of the exhibition currently on display. It's called Dispatch: War Photographs in Print, 1854 to 2008. And Rita Leisner's here. She's a photojournalist, lecturer at the University of Toronto, and author of, I love this title, Looking for Marshall McLuhan in Afghanistan. Did you find him? No, you didn't find him. That's okay. It's great to have you both here. And we look forward to not only discussing, but showing people some of the pictures that we're going to be talking about here. Your exhibition, Thierry, goes from 1854, so middle of the 19th century, right up to 2008. And does that suggest that photography pretty much went to war as soon as photography was invented?
Yes, almost, because the first photographer considered as being a war photographer is Roger Fenton, and he went to Crimea in 1854 and brought back images that were used by the Illustrated London News to illustrate war.
Although it's interesting, let's, if we can, Sheldon, bring up the first couple of images that we want to discuss. And here's the photograph, which I think looks fantastic. And maybe could you just describe, first of all, what we're seeing before I show the next one?
Yes, we are seeing the General Bosquet and Captain Dampierre, who were in Crimea, just in front of their tent. It's a very simple photograph, a portrait of two militarians in Crimea.
And yet, let's show the next image now, for some reason, that's what ended up in the newspaper. Not a photograph, but an etching of the photograph. How come?
Yeah, for technical reasons first, it wasn't possible to reproduce the photograph in the press, so they had to be translated by an engraver into these kind of illustrations. So you can see the differences between the photograph and the illustration here for technical reasons, as I said, but also for cultural reasons. We don't see the background of the photograph, but
bring it up again, Sheldon, if you would.
Yeah, the background, you can see, for example, that the two characters and two tents, and we can see a landscape and clouds in the sky. If we can see again the photograph, then you'll see that these components are not in the originals. So
why'd they add them?
Well, the engraver added them because obviously the photograph wasn't enough to convey war properly in the press at the time.
Huh. Okay, Rita, let me ask you to weigh in on that and tell me what you think is lost when you don't use the original photograph, but rather you use the etching instead.
Well, you know, if we jump to today, once again, we're translating images through different mediums. If you look at smartphone photographs, which are being used to cover conflict these days, the smartphone applies certain effects to images. So already we're getting an image that's translated through some kind of device. And also, of course, viewers today have very different expectations than they would have at Fenton's time. And today we don't accept that degree of changing of imagery without acknowledging very clearly that that's what's taking place. Of course, an etching and a photograph have different expectations, or viewers have different expectations of them.
But it's interesting, the notion that even 150 years ago, people were messing with reality to convey something else. So this is nothing new in a way. This has been going back, this is going on for a long time.
Even more. I mean, photography was kind of the first beginning of let's look at things as being real and consider that worthy of a second look, right? I mean...
Now, would you call what we just saw, let's take the original photo, the man seated, the man standing by, is that photojournalism? Would you call it that?
Well, photojournalism is a genre that wouldn't have been known of back in the day. I mean, it was a document of sorts, but of course, well, Fenton, you know, not unlike photojournalists today, he had a reason for going to the Crimea. I mean, people say that one of those reasons was to help give a better impression of what was going on in the war, and he was a very connected person who was sent by very connected people to the Crimea to take a certain kind of very dignified looking image of the conflict.
And here we are 150 years later, and the Crimea is still a spot where photojournalists go to capture new terrible images. Let's bring up our next series of images if we can. And these are two pictures which are not of the same event, but strangely enough are very evocative of one another. There's D-Day. The storming of the beaches of Normandy, 6th of June, 1944 was the day it started. And that's that photo. And now look at this. That's Vietnam in the 60s. And it's essentially the same type of picture, but of course, a very different war and a very different set of circumstances. What do these two images, even though they're so similar, Thierry, what do they say to you?
Well, what do they say to me? Well, I remember when I was looking for the images of the Vietnam War in the archive of that we have at the Ryerson Image Center, the Black Star collection, and I went through about 3,000 images, and I saw that image by Sully of soldiers running, and I immediately thought that it should be part of the exhibition, and I didn't know why at the beginning. And then I realized that actually that image was reminding me another one, which was the one by Kappa. And I thought that it would be very interesting to show that and to explain that in the show, because Sully's image is not only conveying war in Vietnam, but it is also conveying a previous event, which was the landing of the troop during the Second World War, and also a photojournalistic approach, which was Robert Capa's approach. So in one image, we had different layers, and I think that it was exactly what I had in mind when I was, conceptualizing that show. And maybe to come back to what Rita was talking about, which is what's the visual culture we have to when we look at images in a magazine, or when we take a photograph as a photographer. I think it's all about that. The show wants to talk about photography not as window open to the world, but as images, as representation of war, made of choices by the photographers, choosing the black and white or color, the framing, or even the lighting. And after that, the choices made by the editors, organizing the images, selecting the images. When we see images of war in a magazine, I think we have to understand all these layers to better access to the content of these images.
I get you, but Rita, what I found so fascinating about the juxtaposition of those two pictures is the fact that they're basically capturing the same type of thing. But the first one, of course, has gone down in history as the most heroic, potentially the most heroic battle in the history of the world. One of them anyway, to be sure. That one there, D-Day. I mean, there's little argument about the significance in a positive way on Western civilization and our way of life, freedom and democracy, of that landing. Mm-hmm. And there's also very little debate nowadays that Vietnam was a horrible mistake and we have a completely different understanding of that conflict today and the usefulness of it, and yet it's the same picture. Do the photos, in a way, and there's the Vietnam shot, the photos, in a way, don't provide the historical context for two very different interpretations of what basically looks like the same thing. Am I grasping here? You know what I'm getting at?
No, I know what you're getting at. Well, first of all, Kappa's photograph was the first of its kind, really. And that's one of the reasons it's so lasting, not just because of it covered D-Day. And therefore, any photojournalist to come after that is going to be stylistically highly influenced by that. And you will hear photojournalists talking about this, the visual history that photojournalists are very well versed in. And it affects how they look, not just because they want to be part of a tradition, but because it creates powerful images. And the other thing is when we're talking about context, an image is a snapshot. And while they say an image can speak 1,000 words, it needs that context. So Sully's Vietnam image is one image of many, many images to come out of that conflict, and we would look at those in context with Philip Jones Griffith's more critical images of the conflict. So,
is there any way to know whether Sully was influenced by that D-Day landing shot?
There's no doubt.
There's no doubt he was.
I would say there's no, because you wouldn't not know that image. And you can't pick up a camera without that being in the way that you see.
So any photojournalist worth his salt, as Sully was, would have clearly had that.
Well, any photojournalist who's ever looked at pictures would just know it. I don't think it's necessarily conscious, sometimes more than others, but absolutely.
Can I talk to you about Afghanistan?
Sure.
You've been there as an embedded photojournalist? You've been there as an...
No, only embedded in Afghanistan, unembedded in Iraq.
Unembedded in Iraq. That's what you call it, eh? Unembedded? Which basically...
It's a term that came up. The term itself was sort of created to have a way of talking about being embedded, because during the Iraq War, the U.S. Government instilled this embedding system whereby journalists could get access to the conflict by living with the military, which is something that has always taken place. Fenton was embedded in a way. It was just the degree to which it was done and how controlled it was during the Iraq War. And so when we put the unembedded book together, which was quite a simple idea just to show images that were taken not inside the military embed system, our publisher, Chelsea Green in Vermont, they actually came up with the title. And it's a very effective title.
Yeah, it certainly conveys what you were doing. But when you are taking pictures in a war zone like that, are you conscious of the fact that your audience is half a world away with obviously no firsthand, 99.9% of us with no firsthand experience similar to what you have, and are you consciously trying to tell us your opinion of war through the lens?
I think initially you're just there witnessing, because you don't go in the first time anyways with any more knowledge than anybody else. You're kind of like a soldier going in for the first time. And so you wait for the story to reveal itself to you. And so if you happen to be in circumstances where, American soldiers are taking Iraqi civilians prisoner and interrogating them or roughing them up, then you photograph that without thinking.
This is yours. Look at that. As you spoke it, there it is. That's your shot of a prisoner of war.
Yeah. Well, I certainly knew at the time that it was something, but I didn't know. First of all, it was long before Abu Ghraib happened, so it was the first time I had ever seen anything like that. These were among the first, if not the first, photographs taken of Iraqi civilians being detained at a time when the U.S. government was still denying that there was any kind of resistance to the invasion.
Did you get that shot published?
Not till over half a year later, after Abu Ghraib broke.
Okay, so just take me through the chronology. You got that picture. Abu Ghraib is not yet broken. So
I got that picture in June 2003.
And did you try to...
Yes.
You tried to sell it right away to somebody.
I stayed up all night in the desert, and with the help of not that unit of soldiers, but another unit of soldiers who I had befriended and was living with, we filed those back to New York. I thought they were significant images.
To whom?
To my agency at the time, SIPA Press, a French agency with a bureau in New York.
And they tried to sell them?
They I don't know how hard they, but yeah, there was no interest.
There was no interest.
Yeah, and I'm in the desert at this time, on this embed in dangerous, very uncomfortable situations where, this is no military base with a Tim Hortons. This is like sleeping in the dirt with no running water and, et cetera. And the only access to the outside world was my satellite transmitter that was very, very expensive. The soldiers, hadn't seen internet or TV in over 6 months, and we were very cut off. So I didn't really know what was going on. I just knew that I sent them. And it wasn't until later that sort of the narrative around those images became significant to others and to myself.
What do you think, Thierry, as a person who's responsible for ensuring that important photos get to an audience, what do you think of the fact that they apparently sat on that picture for a half a year?
What I think is a lot of photographs are being taken And the process of selection is something very difficult, and that you have different figures acting in that process. The photographer is one piece of a process. After that, as Rita explained, you have people working for an agency, and after that you have pictures editors, and after that you have an artistic directors, and you have to go through all these doors before being published. And at each step you have a set of choices and criteria that are happening. And I think it's a very interesting case, because it means that not only you have to take the photograph, but you have to ensure that it's properly pictured to convince all these figures to publish it.
All right, but in your experience, who has the best judgment as to whether or not a photo merits an audience seeing it? The person who takes the picture? The agent who has to sell the picture? The person who owns the newspaper and has to decide whether to publish it? The person who, in your case, has a beautiful glossy coffee table book, perhaps? Who's best able to make that decision?
Honestly, I don't know how to answer your question. It really depends on what's your goal. And I think that each figure has different goals.
Well, what about conveying the truth about a battlefield? I mean, who's best to judge what ought to happen?
As I said, I don't know
It's a
how
tough
to
one,
answer.
eh?
I mean, I have an example in mind. I mean, I remember what happened with Eugene Smith and the managing editor of Life. They disagreed about the selection of Smith's images, and the managing editor at the time, who was, if I remember correctly, Thompson, said to Smith, "You don't have enough distance to know what kind of photograph we have to select and publish." And he said that to Smith, and that's which was difficult. And Smith quit it at that moment. Life, I think. I mean, the one in charge of the magazine is probably, the one with the most power to make the selection.
Well, yes, they
knowing what is the readership. Because that's the point too. I mean, they have to reach a readership. I mean, a picture editor or an artistic director in Time doesn't have the same goals than a picture editor in Newsweek.
Sure, but there's a built-in conflict there, right? They're trying to figure out what sells, and you're trying to tell the truth, aren't you?
I would know. See, I wouldn't say. I mean, maybe with the bad editor, but ideally, we try and find editors and museum curators who we can work with, who all have a common goal, which is to tell a story. And it does take a lot of people to know how it should be published, in what context, which image should be selected. I mean, maybe there are. And after the fact, of course, it's easier to look back and say, oh, this picture could have made a difference. At the time, I mean, I think my prisoners' pictures are a particular case, because there was also the political controversy of those images, because magazines have to sell. I mean, today more than anything, we know that. And you can't publish pictures that are going to make it impossible for you to publish later pictures or other stories. And, at that time, during the war in Iraq, the military and the government were controlling newspapers' accesses to the conflict. And if you did something really to piss them off, especially if you weren't 100% sure that this was the story, if these are the first pictures you've seen of this kind, you don't know that it's systemic yet, right?
And I wonder whether they trust the 1,000 decisions you have to make before you take every picture. How am I going to frame this? How am I going to light it? What am I going to show? What am I not going to show? Am I trying to highlight something that may be particularly provocative at the expense of maybe opening up the lens, and therefore it's a less provocative shot? I mean, all that comes into the mix too, doesn't it?
Well, I think more likely they're thinking, is this an anomalous situation, right, or is there a mass insurgency about to erupt? Or, are we going to be presenting something as headline news that maybe is only just happening in this tiny little corner with a few strange extremists? And I mean, as for the lighting, it was pitch black, and it's only because I'm really good at using flash in the dark that there was any picture at all,
But ultimately, as
McLuhan would say, the content of the image is the light.
There you go. Ultimately, though, we're really trying to figure out how well pictures can tell the truth. So how do you answer that? How well do pictures, in fact, tell the truth, whatever that means?
Well, you've said it yourself, what does truth mean? But I mean, versions of truth, you know, and versions and efforts, like, you know, progress, not perfection, we try. And I think that's what our responsibility as humans and people who decide to be engaged in political work of any kind, which photojournalism absolutely is. You can only try. And you're never going to convince everyone. You're never going to get it absolutely right. There's a lot more that goes to having a picture out there, obviously, than you know, mere witnessing or just taking the photograph. And photographers know that it's, you know, Thierry has spoken to this, and he's absolutely right, that it's a large community that also includes the military and aid workers and analysts, et cetera. And, you know, that's why I publish books, and we have exhibitions, and there's a whole dialogue and discussion. I mean, here we are talking about photographs I took in 2003 in the desert in Iraq. So.
Do you worry, Thierry, that when you're putting together an exhibition, or perhaps when you're choosing pictures for a book, that you're trying to capture the truth, but if it's a one-off, for example, it may be more propaganda than truth? Does that debate concern you when you're choosing pictures?
What concerns me is the debate about truth, because I'm not sure what is truth about war. And especially when we are in the field of journalism. I think what we are having access to is, as Rita said, is a point of views. You have the photographer's point of view about a subject, and the photographer is giving his point of view through a balance of content and forms. You were showing images of the cover of Rita's book, and you can see that Rita was using the Ipstamatic application for the iPhone, which is giving a very specific form to the content of her images. And through that form, she gave her point of view about what was happening in Afghanistan. So I think that what we are having access to in magazines and in the show, that's what I'm trying to exhibit, is how war has been photographed and displayed in the magazine across time. And what you can see through the show is that according to the time, to the era, and to the visual culture, choices have been made differently. And that is telling us about our era and about previous era.
We've got a couple of images left, and I don't want the clock to get away from us here before we see these as well. So Sheldon, if we could, photos 8 and 9, please. And Rita, tell us what we're looking at here.
Okay, well, this is kind of a light-hearted image in a way. On the left, it's a photograph of some soldiers working out, as you can see, without their shirts on. And on the right, they have their shirts on. So I was working in this embed situation that was highly controlled by a super managing command, which is absolutely their right to do, but it was in this pioneering, really groundbreaking social media experiment where the military was collaborating with this group of journalists to produce images that would be uploaded to the internet and to a Facebook page.
Well, what's the story you're trying to tell with those pictures?
Well, that the military command structure was frustrated that they can't control the war in Iraq. They were frustrated they couldn't control social media. They were trying to control us by saying, you can't publish photographs of soldiers without their shirts on, which is really grasping at straws in a conflict where many people are suffering and being killed, with journalists who have photographed much more serious things. So
you could shoot dead soldiers, but not soldiers with their shirts off?
We couldn't, yes. So that's why I said to them, look, I can't publish this picture on the Facebook page unless you have your shirts on. So would you mind putting your shirts on for the second image? Okay.
And here's this letter. This is a very, very, I'm not sure what word to use to describe this. Give me an adjective here. I mean, this certainly conveys a moment in time, a mood, a person, a place. Go ahead. What are you shooting for here?
McLuhan would say that technologies are all extensions of the human body, psychically and physically. And so these soldiers go to Afghanistan. They're heavily armed and covered, and it's barely possible to see that there's a human being underneath them. And to me, it still reminds me of images of medieval armor. And I mean, there's a lot we can talk about in terms of armor. First of all, it separates the person who's, ostensibly partly there to win over hearts and minds, but, appears in this sort of camouflage outfit. In more extreme cases, they're actually inside a tank. And you might say that to the person looking at a tank, there's no difference between the tank and the person inside of the tank.
Gotcha. So in some respects, there's very little actual person you can see in that shot, right?
Well, let me ask you something. Is there anything odd about the person in that image to you?
Is there anything odd about the person?
Do you notice what gender they are?
Well, it's a woman, but
you did notice.
Well, of course.
I wasn't sure, really.
I don't know,
okay.
But I don't think of that.
Well, the Afghans can't tell.
But I don't think of that as being odd.
Well, there are very few women soldiers in anywhere.
That didn't strike me as odd at all. That is becoming increasingly present, I think. Well, you say no.
No, not really, no. And when they are there, they're not treated as equals or with much respect. So
that's another show, Rita. We got to come back for that other show. We commend for people's added understanding for what's going on right now in Thierry Gervais' show at the Ryerson Image Center. This is the exhibition is called War Photographs in Print, 1854 to 2008. And Rita, of course, looking for Marshall McLuhan in Afghanistan. Good of you to spend so much time with us tonight at TVO. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having us.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.